Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to my lightning talk on the long-term recovery of restored Sacramento River floodplains. A quick about me, I'm a third-year PhD student at UC Santa Cruz in the Environmental Studies Department. My background is in land management and environmental consulting in the Sacramento Valley. And I study the long-term recovery of restored floodplains, mainly in the National Wildlife Refuge and state wildlife areas. The Society of Ecological Restoration defines ecological restoration as the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. I mean, your goal in this field is to understand how to predict different habitat outcomes based on environmental inputs and model building. So I'm evaluating the previous predictions, which suppose that successional trajectory would improve in restored sites so that it would converge with reference forests, which were the targets of this restoration. And I'm evaluating if that is continuing to happening, if it is arrested, or it has been degrading. So as an introduction, California riverine floodplains were vast, supported a considerable amount of riparian vegetation, but since the annexation of California in 1848, California riparian habitats became impacted by flood control to protect against mining, conversion to agriculture, as well as logging for steamboats, reducing the habitat extent to less than 5% of its historical range. The objective of this research is to look at a lot of these restored areas that occur over 160-kilometer range that started in 1989 and are now 32, some of which are now 32 years old, which is the same age as me. This research focuses on comparing restored and reference forests. I also call reference forest remnant. And in this research, I follow up on two previous understory surveys, one in 2001 and one in 2007. So I'm creating a third one, which allows you to calculate habitat trajectory. And I'm also doing a follow-up overstory survey. And that survey was done with a couple different efforts from 2008 to 2012. So I'm able to calculate the rate and change of overstory. So my field methods take place in these 20 by 30 meter plots where there are 10 1-meter quadrats where I put them on either side of these 10-meter shrub transects. There's 5 of those. And then I measure all trees above 2.5 centimeters at diameter breast height, which is 1.3 meters above the ground. And I set it up in this way so that I could get a lot of data collection, but minimize the amount of walking that I have to do through these forest plots because there's quite a bit of shrubs, mainly blackberry, so it's quite difficult to walk through it. I collected quite a bit of data over the 8-week period. It's the understory data that I've tabulated here. I haven't done all my tests. These are some preliminary results, but I found that the most dominant species were Armenian blackberry and Bromus diandrus in the restored forest, and in the reference or remnant forest, there was Bromus diandrus and Carex barbari. So it's quite a bit more exotic in the restored, and you see that with these relative cover, the relative understory cover, where it's about 25% in the restored forest, where it's a little over 50% in the remnant, and those means are significantly different. And both these values are lower than the previous survey that was done in 2007, as seen in McLean et al., where this decrease could be related to a dry season. So I'm hoping that we get enough rain because I'm planning on surveying again and doing all the sites and getting more data. But it could be an arrestment of succession in the restored forest because it hasn't really gone up that much. And it could also be the reference site is also degrading at the same time through invasive species invasion. If you look at the overstory composition, it was mainly populus fremonti, but that has been declining slowly still, even though it is the dominant species, but it's getting replaced by different species in these two remnant and restored forests. And the question I'm asking here is, are restored forests over time becoming more like remnant forests? Because you'd expect around 30 years that there'd be a change in the type of species composition that you'd be seeing as the forest is going from being a young forest to a middle-aged forest. But a lot of what's being replaced in the remnant forest is this California black walnut, which is hybridized with English walnut, so isn't quite native, and a decline of almost every other species. Whereas in the restored sites, you're seeing Fraxinus latifolia, Quercus lobata, Salix goodingi. You're seeing different species coming in that you're just not really seeing in the restored site, the reference forests, but are maybe even declining, like the Quercus lobata. And you're seeing a huge drop in the willows in the restored forest. So it might be becoming a forest that's completely different than these reference forests that it was targeting. I've collected about half the data for this Overstory data. So I'll have more next year, and I can more decisively say. So the future work I'm planning is testing a mechanistic model from earlier, which looked at how does quickly shading out with high canopy cover affect plant invasion in the long run, where a lot of the shading effort was to reduce sun-loving exotics, but those benefits could be temporary as there's a lot of shade-tolerant exotics that can move in. I also want to evaluate the impact of landscape level factors like distance of a restored forest to the river or distance of a restored forest to reference forest and how that affects native species cover and has that increase since the last time this analysis was done. Is this an effect that compounds over time? And I also want to look at calculating habitat heterogeneity indices meaningful to bird and mammals. So, thank you so much to the following funders for supporting this research.